Hello, Martin Rubio.
Hola, Laure.
It's good to see you.
Igual from here, back in New York.
Yes. Now, let me say something to those who are seeing us. I'm Ladelina Martinez from Martinez Gallery in Troy. And recently, the gallery had a virtual exhibition. Amayo New Yorican was the title of that. And three artists were featured. Martin Rubio, who's in front of us, Armando Soto, and Marcos Dimas. And this is an important group because they came at a time in New York City when not much was being done with Hispanic artists. And they viewed their art not only as a practice, but they also viewed their art as a practice in social justice, as a practice in culture. So we have a great deal to be thankful to this group. And they're still alive and still working and still interesting to speak with. So today I've got Martin Rubio, a sculptor who may or may not be a New Yorican. That is to be determined by the end of our conversation. Martin, I know that you were born in Puerto Rico and you came to New York as a young person. Would you tell us if you have any memories of Puerto Rico?
Oh, yes. The earliest memories I have about Puerto Rico is where I grew up in Santurce. It's a small town outside of Old San Juan. And I was living in a wooden house with corrugated tin above the roof, and we lived within a block of this beautiful bay, turquoise, beautiful color. And that's the background that I grew up in.
That's great. So those memories are still with you. What about your earliest memories in New York City related to art?
Okay, so earliest memories related to art happened very, very early when my parents during the summer would take all three of us to cultural sites and museums. And that's when I really got connected in a way that interests me for the rest of my life, was going to all the major art museums in New York.
Was there any favorite artist that impressed you at that time?
Okay, there were several. At the beginning, it was Rembrandt, then it was several other painters, as well as Turner, one of my favorites. And then as I got older, I started to become more and more interested in sculptors. And that happened in 1964 when I went to see for the very first time the Pietà by Michelangelo at the World's Fair.
Yes, that must have impressed you because you have mentioned it a couple of times before. What was it about it that you felt was impressive?
Okay, I lived at the time in Brooklyn, and it was an industrial site very close to us. So I actually saw people work in stone, in metal, in different materials. And when I saw this work by Michelangelo, this is on a whole other level. And that's what I became interested in.
Now, I think you once mentioned to me that you began being interested in the visual arts besides sculpture. Am I correct in saying that? Or did you go immediately into sculpture?
No, originally, very early in life, I was an illustrator. And basically, that's what got me all through school, was that instead of handing in a paper written report, mines were illustrated with some writing.
I see. And but you abandoned that at some point, it looks like. Or did you take up sculpture and continue illustration at the same time?
Okay, so it wasn't until I got a scholarship to the School of Visual Arts, which I absolutely love, here in New York City. And that's when I got a basic background of all the arts, two-dimensional, three-dimensional, photography, filmmaking, printmaking. And at the end of my second year at the School of Visual Arts, I decided my first love is sculpting and architecture. And I wanted to make public works. I didn't want to make art that you put on a table, or what we call table art, or indoor decorative arts. I wanted to do public works. And during that period that I was at the School of Visual Arts, from my second to my fourth year at the School of Visual Arts, I worked on outdoor murals, outdoor sculptures, projects that were being done during the summer all over New York City. One of them being, I designed the structural base that sits on the left wall of Grant's tomb in New York City.
So it's still there.
It's still there.
So one can go and see that work of yours from, was that in the 70s or the 60s?
That was the late 60s. And I'm only responsible for the structure. Later on, the artist chose to cover it with little tiles. So it's a very different experience now.
So did you enjoy that idea of working in groups when you do public art? Was that part of what attracted you to public art?
Not only did I like it, I loved it. Most of the time, I would spend in my studio weeks and months without seeing anybody or without interacting with anybody. But working in an outdoor project, it's fabulous. You get a chance to work with other people who have different experience and different talents than I do.
So, but it takes a particular kind of skill. It's not just your artistic skills that are at work. There are other collaborative skills at work, no?
Correct.
So how would you describe your attitude in that kind of collaboration?
Okay, so I grew up in an art-oriented family. My mother was in the book publishing business, on the making of books. So I ended up seeing incredible works of art that she would bring in, individual sheets that she knew I was interested. My father was a painter, a professional painter, house painter, but he also was a machinist. So I got to be able to juggle very manual work with machines at the same time. And those are the kinds of people that I met when I did outdoor projects.
Yeah. Now, as a sculptor, when you're going to do a piece, do you have in your mind an idea of how the piece is going to come, how it's going to look at the end? Or are you, as you're working on the piece, sort of discovering what some have said that, in the stone, you discover the piece that you are sculpting? I know you have some maquettes, so that makes me think that perhaps you think ahead of time what it is that you want to come up with. But on the other hand, I'm wondering if the maquette is the result already of that process of having decided what it is that you are going to do. So I guess my question, which is very convoluted, and I'm sorry,
Okay,
I guess my question is, do you think it through entirely and then work on it? Or do you find your way as you're working?
okay, so let me start at the beginning of my career. What happened was that we were working with materials as carvers. This is how art history and art techniques are taught in most schools. So it wasn't until I left the School of Visual Arts that I started taking private classes on how to work with not just stone, but with plastics, with wood, with aluminum, with stainless steel, with corten steel, with cement, and it was a whole other world. Now I was not working with a piece of stone like Michelangelo would work and try to bring out something that he sees in that stone. I grew past that. At this point, I'm like a computer. I figure out what I want to make, and then I pick the material. I'm in a whole other level.
So that goes right into my next question very, very nicely. What kind of materials do you like to work with most?
Since I prefer public works, I like materials that are durable. I totally love stone, marble, but there isn't enough marble anymore in the world to be able to build something big. It just doesn't happen anymore. I love wood, the same thing with wood. We have pretty much exhausted many of the uses of all these materials. So I dedicated the last 20 years of my life working with stainless steel, aluminum, and corten steel, as well implementing the process of carbon fiber.
Well, here at the gallery, we have some of your wooden pieces and also some of your metal sculptures. And there's a different feeling to each of them.
Right.
I wanted to know, why is it that you do what you do? How does it make you feel to work with objects like that?
Okay, so I want to fill you in on what my palette is like. On the one side of my palette is a different aesthetics, different color, and on the other side of my palette is a different aesthetics and different culture. So I have a dual cultural identity. Part of me is Latino from the Caribbean, and the other part of me is from New York. So I am definitely a New Yorican. So when I start designing a work of art, I can pick from the side that's from the Caribbean, nature, Kelly green, the sand, the beige of the color of the sand, the blue turquoise water, the bushes, the colors of the plants and the flowers. On the other side of the palette is New York, bricks, cement, glass, steel, stainless steel. That's that backdrop. Those textures, those colors on the other side of the Caribbean, and I can pick from any one of those palettes.
And would you say the international style is also part of New York? There's something very international about your work. There are some modernist elements in your work. At the same time, there's somebody making a lot of noise right outside with a motorcycle. So at the same time, we see some work of yours that is very much in the pop art tradition. So
In the what tradition?
the pop art tradition.
Okay, yes.
That seems to have been a contemporary, as it must have been, of Andy Warhol's and others.
Correct.
So I'm trying to think of where you would locate yourself between an international style, a pop art tradition, a Caribbean style, or would that all be connected?
Okay, so it's a collection of all three. I did study in New York. It was the epicenter of art in the 60s and 70s. And yes, there was an enormous influence in all of the galleries that represented some of the contemporary artists from all over the world. One of the reasons why I chose to stay and study in New York. So my collection of work embodies both the pop art, which is popular culture, and it also has that influence of a dual cultural identity, as well as New York, that international connection with people and different styles. So what I have done over the last 50 years is that for the first 10 years of my life, I found out I was going blind, and I started to think of what would happen if I could no longer see. Can I still work? Can I still be an artist? And I developed a conceptual ability to be able to create works in my head that I could put down on paper, whether it was writing or actually illustrating. And I chose 10 popular silhouettes. So imagine 1 to 9 plus a 0. I have 10 shapes that I keep on a flat plane. And whenever I want to create, I pick one of those 10s. Depending on how I make it long or wide or thick, I can reach a different aesthetic point of view. So I'm actually forecasting and using very popular images, because these silhouettes have existed in our culture today and over 1,000 years in other cultures.
Right. I guess I may have intimated that in fact you are part of a generation, but I'd like to find out from you whether you feel that you are part of a generation, part of a group of people that had, if not similar ideas, at least a sense of trying to reach similar goals or compatible goals. And I'm talking about the large number of Latinos and Puerto Ricans in New York City who became involved in the arts. Not just the visual arts, but also writing, filmmaking, singing, musicals, and so on. So, do you see yourself as part of a group in that sense? Or do you feel that what you had to say was really a very individualistic kind of thing?
Okay, I was up until 1971 part of that group, very intimately involved with part of that group. And it was awesome to be part of that group. Socially, politically, there were so many people in New York that were politically, socially active within the arts, within music. It was an explosion of Latinos getting turned on to art and culture. And the reason I picked 1971 is when I was dealing with my personal medical situation, that I could not be part of that social environment anymore. And that's when I said, I have to phase out this. That's something I can't do at the moment.
Well, in a future conversation, I'd like to find out from you how you've seen things, how you've seen the trajectory of Latino artists in New York City, and where you think they are now. But I want to end our conversation today with the question, 100 years from now, what would you like your legacy to be? How would you like to be remembered?
That's curious. If anything, I would like to be remembered as an artist that experimented with materials way beyond his generation.
Well, that's great. And your work will remain beyond our mortal coil, so to speak.
Right.
And I'm sure that there will be several which are now in museums that, as part of their permanent collection, that will be available to people. This is assuming, of course, that museums continue being, which is another question altogether.
Correct.
Yes.
Well, the museums will be relevant 10 years from now, 20 years from now, depends on that.
Yeah. Martin, it's always good to talk to you. And it's very enjoyable, and time flies very quickly. So we'll have one of these conversations sometime in the future, not too long. I hope we'll have to wait for it. Take care.
Laura, thank you for today.
Hasta luego.
Ciao.